Happy holidays. Want to give your host a gift? Consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show this holiday season. It really helps the show grow. From all of us at Believe, have a Merry Christmas, everyone, and a happy holiday.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm delighted to be talking to Dr. Michelle Moore, Professor of English and Film at the College of DuPage. Where is that, Michelle?
It's a small college that is right outside of Chicago in Illinois in the US.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you for joining me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I have had...
Thank you for inviting me and for having me here.
I particularly wanted to talk to you because you know how you have one of those, you have holes in your film knowledge, and one of those holes was definitely John Waters for me. I knew Hairspray, and I knew his live appearances when he was doing book tours, I think he still is as well. But I didn't really know his filmography that well. And then this summer, just for some reason I thought, you know what, I'm going to watch some John Waters films. And I had such a blast. So your book was a brilliant accompaniment to watching those films.
That's lovely. I have hoped that the timing of the book would really speak to the moment that we're in right now, and that it would be presented as an accompaniment to the fact that you can stream so many of his films now, and that he's getting all kinds of new viewers and a new audience that he hasn't had before.
Well, he's certainly got one in me, and after this conversation, I'm sure he'll have some more with some of our listeners. So the book that we're talking about, or that's going to help us with our conversation, is Refocus the Films of John Waters, and is a collected work of criticism, which includes an introduction by yourself and also an extended interview with John Waters. But to kick us off, how did you tell us a little bit about yourself in terms of how you got to where you are in academia, how your interest in film began, and yeah, let's start there.
Well, I've had I would say, a long and winding career because my interests have always been interdisciplinary. And I began really working in English and literature. And I went to a very small liberal arts college. And while I was allowed to do things that were film related, I was really focused on novels and short stories in a very traditional English major. But I discovered there that my interest was modernism, modernism with a capital M. And something that struck me as an undergraduate was that you can't do modernism without talking about technology. And what is the art form that is the technology of modernism but film? So when I got to grad school, I still had this interest, but I didn't know what to do with it. And luckily, there was a comparative literature department there where the founder had already started his own interest in film, and the school had a strong film department. Ken Jacobs was teaching there then. And because the founder of the comp lit department was also interested in film, he said, you know what? Film and literature is a comparison. Do it. And that was a very unique opportunity and an experience for me. And so my scholarly work then, what got me my degree, was in film and literature, and particularly in representations of violence. And I wrote a chapter of my dissertation on John Waters and Todd Solondz. And this was before John Waters began to talk about Todd Solondz. So it's something that I'm proud of, that I noticed that connection before Waters even began to speak publicly about his admiration for the film director Todd Solondz.
I totally get that connection between literature because that's the same as myself. I came from looking at literature academically, and that to me felt like it was seamless moving from literature to film. I've always felt that sort of poetry is just cinema, sort of avant la lettre. It's already cinema. You get swooping shots in Shelley the way you do in Scorsese.
I agree. And then it begins to flip back the other way when you begin to notice how many writers became screenwriters in Hollywood, right? And for the longest time, to we didn't talk about in modernist studies the screen careers, the film writing careers of the big modernist writers. And here I'm thinking Fitzgerald Faulkner, Dorothy Parker, right? It was something almost taboo, right?
Mm.
Because modernism is supposed to be so non-commercial. And the idea that these writers needed money and had to go to Hollywood for it was just so distasteful, I think, in modernist studies for so long. And of course, that's flipped, I would say, in the last decade. And I found one of Faulkner's quote unquote missing screenplays, Dreadful Hollow, which is a vampire screenplay,
Oh,
and
wow.
found it in the archive, wrote extensively about it. And I I did it at a time where there really wasn't that much being written about Faulkner in Hollywood and Faulkner in screenplays. And of course, John Waters is just an avid reader. He says, don't don't fuck anyone if you go to their house and they don't have any books, right? So in his house, even, it's just bookshelf after bookshelf. He is such an avid reader, and you can see that in his films that he's working between film and art, physical art, and paintings and photography and writing. And I think that's one of the things that I really like in my filmmakers when they themselves are interdisciplinary and know their histories and know that, as you said, that filmmakers were poets and poets were filmmakers in the early days and then they were again. And I think that's exactly how John Waters positions himself and thinks of himself as a multimedia artist.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you look at someone like Jean Cocteau in France, or for that matter, I mean, I think of the modernists, the Irish modernists like Joyce and Beckett, and Beckett's got Laurel and Hardy all over, and works with Buster Keaton in film, and
Mhm.
Joyce was a manager of a cinema in Dublin, very briefly, albeit, but it was the first cinema in Dublin that was managed by James Joyce, would you believe, before. Writing perhaps the most cinematic novel ever written with Ulysses, which has all these cinematic techniques folded into it.
That's exactly it. And you begin to see in the novels through the 20th and now into the 21st century that film is becomes the film language is the way in which writers are describing their world. It's utterly fascinating. And I think once you begin to see it, you can't unsee it. And I'm also interested in how filmmakers are um, using language, right, to create visual double entendres and um, there's a great one at the beginning of Mondo Trasho where the very very young Vivian Pierce, right, is dressed as the bombshell and her blonde hair and she's the bombshell and she gets on the bus and everyone's looking at her and she takes out Kenneth Anger's Hollywood Babylon. I mean, talk about bus reading, right? And at that
Mm-mm.
time. And so here you have the bombshell reading, and what she's reading are bombshell discoveries about Hollywood, right? Better or for worse. And I just love that kind of interconnected visual pun. And she's reading, and she's a bombshell, and there's bombshells, and then it's setting us up in this very early Waters film for the other bombshells that are going to come in the newspaper, right? And the other bombshells he's going to show us.
Absolutely, and there's also that sort. Yeah, those puns go all the way through it. Probably most famously with the end of Pink Flamingos, where where something happens which is literally tasteless. And yet at the same time, the reason we're disgusted by it is the notion of taste. That what does that taste of that you're seeing being eaten? So there's a weird paradox in there as well. What was your sort of first encounter with John Waters? I don't mean like literally physically, but I mean in terms of his movies.
Well, when I was young, when I was a teenager, the big commercial films, right, were coming out. Those
Mm,
were Hairspray, Cry Baby, and these were the ones that really got me. They were well advertised. Waters said he always wanted to be a sellout, and he was selling out through the 80s, as we know. And so those were the ones that I first had access to. And since the book's come out, I've had conversation with several of my very old friends, and I'm saying things to them like, wait, did we go see Hairspray together? Who did I go and see Hairspray with? And we've been trying to remember and piece it together because at this point, these memories, my friends and I just have these memories together as we've been quoting Waters lines to each other for the rest of our lives. And then it was really as an undergrad that I could see the earlier Waters films, which were at that point hard to get because in here in the US, Blockbuster was starting to take over from the mom and pop video stores. And Blockbuster would not carry John Waters films,
mm.
which is really a formation, a deep memory for people who are John Waters fans, how difficult it was to get these films. And so I had knew where the mom and pop stores were, the indie stores, and I would just go and I was renting John Waters, and I had found films, and I had found many several underground film festivals, where they would do one of his films or two of his films, and I would be sure to attend so that I could see them on the big screen. And so, and it was just organic from that point forward. I was a fan, and I was hooked from the very first film that I saw of his.
And the very first film then would have been one of the big commercial ones, would have been something like Hairspray or
I believe it was
right.
Hairspray. It's hard to remember. And then I think the first one that I was able to rent, which felt very salacious and underground because no one was going to show it, of the earlier group, I can remember watching Female Trouble,
Mm.
which I still utterly adore with Don Davenport. And I can remember watching Multiple Maniacs as well, very early. And the exact order has been lost to time, but those are the earliest ones that I remember really encountering, which is really the good word for it, because you encounter a John Waters film, right? You don't watch it. You're being exposed to something that is, as you said, distasteful and also lovely and interesting, and it just hits you on so many levels at the same time. So yes, those are my moments of encountering, I think, Waters' films that stick out in my memory.
There's always this strange thing with films, I think, where a film isn't just sort of positing a fictional universe that you sort of enter. I felt this very much with John Waters. I feel it with Texas Chainsaw Massacre as well and some other films. But it
Mhm.
also posits a universe in which this kind of film is made. So you're in the
Mhm.
fictional universe, but you're also in the universe where this is this allowed? Is this Are you allowed to make a film like this that does this sort of presents you with this kind of world? And the two things are to some degree porous, that they can they influence each other. So you're watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre and you're thinking, oh my God, have they killed people when they made this? And when you're watching Pink Flamingos, you might be thinking, have they killed chickens when they've made this?
And I suspect that's why Waters is so drawn to horror, right?
Mm,
And even though he'll always name Serial Mom as his stand-up of a horror film, his favorite one, all of his films are horror filled, horrible, and about horror. And the connection to it's Toby Hooper's film that's so interesting is that is based on the Ed Gein story, right, from Wisconsin, Leatherface.
mm,
And much as Psycho was and others, there's others in that genre. And in Waters, even though it's his own universe, they're all in Baltimore, right? He's filming on that Baltimore street. So it is and is not real at the same time. And when you watch those early films, he's got so many just he's got so much footage of people walking down the street in Baltimore in their hats and their hairdos and their coats and their jackets. And I'm fascinated by that. And in the long interview in the book, I asked him outright, "Are you doing documentary? Are you thinking about this when were you thinking about this when you were filming?" And he didn't. He just kind of said, no, I'm making a fiction film. But I see documentary in there. I see that intersection, as he put it, that intersection, right, of the that real world with this fictional universe where anything can happen. And it's in the intertextuality, those multi-layer texts, other films, books, newspaper articles, all that stuff, that detritus of our culture that he is suturing together and folding together in a new and a unique way that also allows us to have one foot that this in that world that this is real, but then how could this possibly be happening? How am I seeing this? How is he making this um, absolutely outlandish plot with outlandish people while telling the real stories again and again that aren't real? Paradoxical, and I think it's utterly brilliant.
yeah, I totally agree with that paradoxical nature of sort of because in the documentary I Am Divine that was released a few years ago, I mean they really talk about the fact that they were kind of filming stuff on real streets with people walking by, and the
Hmm.
reactions you see on the people's faces are just the reactions that Divine would get as she walked down the street dressed in that way. It
Right.
wasn't um there was no preparation. There was no AD standing at the end of the street and preparing.
Hmm.
There are no extras, and so in a sense, I would totally agree that there is an element of documentary, and also, with that, I don't want to focus too much on this because it's such a famous shot but the insistence on not faking the dog shit moment
Hmm.
strikes me as a documentary decision. You want to
Hmm.
give the audience something which can't be explained away, and so well, if you're making just something which is a fiction film, that wouldn't be necessary because all you need is the effect. You don't need the actual thing.
And this is that moment of movie magic, right?
Mm,
Because, and well, I write about that moment with Divine where
yeah.
she eats the dog shit. And she is doing that. Well, we see the dog first, right? And we see the dog shit. And Divine wanted that to be that way so that we knew there wasn't any trickery, that it wasn't movie magic, that we weren't seeing something that was just edited together, but instead it was really happening. And it takes me right back to that carnival at the beginning of Multiple Maniacs, right? Where the sword eater and they were sexual deviants in John Waters' carnival, but traditionally, right, the carnival are sword swallowers and fire eaters, and they're really doing this. They've really prepared their body. There is not trickery there. And so I see in that moment with Divine a direct reference to the carnival acts where the fire eater is actually putting out fire with their tongue. It is actually really happening. There's something authentic about it. It is authenticity. It is authentic. It is happening and real. And then at the same time, we're so used to movie magic where that, of course, this can't be real. Of course, she can't be doing that, right? That's gross. That's utterly disgusting. And even if you made it all the way through the film without being grossed out, that's going to gross you out. And it's going
Oh,
to gross you out in a visceral, authentic way.
that's the kappa. The crapper is the kappa. There's no doubt about it.
Right?
So when you did go and interview John Waters, it feels to me that there's something kind of deliciously antithetical about compiling a academic book of serious academics writing serious academic essays about this filmmaker. I mean, he must be absolutely delighted by, he must be savoring that kind of, you know, attention and
Mhm.
elevation.
He is. He reached out to me after I sent him the copies. He read it in 2 days, and he is, and I quote, over the moon.
Oh, that's
And
delightful.
he is utterly delighted by the book and the way that it came out. And it's still utterly shocking to me how little academic work has been done on him because he's just so important. And getting the interview with him, we went to his home in Baltimore. Getting that interview was not so easy because he has spent the last 20 years of his life on stages giving interviews, right? There is so much material by John Waters on John Waters that the book that doesn't really need to be done is the Waters on Waters, right? The proverbial Schrader on Schrader,
Mm,
the Hitchcock on Hitchcock. Waters has taken care of it because there's just so much material. Waters speaking about Waters. But to do an interview with academics for a book that was more academic, I had really hoped that we were able to get some different kind of material. And by putting it in a book with scholarly analyses, it would buttress and open up his comments in a way that we don't normally think about when he is being interviewed for a newspaper or is on the stage doing his Christmas show, which is coming up, right? We've heard him say so much, but there really was quite a bit left for him to say.
absolutely. And I think it's brilliant to just take something seriously that I don't think is unserious. I think John Waters is funny. I think he's extravagant. He's over the top. He's carnivalesque. He's Rabelaisian. He is all these things, but none of those things exclude seriousness. I
Mhm.
mean, was it G.K. Chesterton who said, comedy is saying the serious in a funny way? Um, all of his, I mean, this goes back to, what when you look at Multiple Maniacs and how he slides in the Tate murders in a way which is kind of outrageous, absolutely outrageous from one point of view, but also from another point of view is kind of saying this is also a commentary on the fact that we're living in this crazy sort of carnivalesque world. The world is a John Waters world. It's not like he's necessarily having to make that much up.
That's exactly it. And when you think about a film like Female Trouble, he is drawing directly from the pamphlets and the books that were being written in the early 60s and the newspaper articles about how the teens are just rebelling and they're doing drugs and they're just rebelling. There's the whole scandal about the Go Ask Alice, right? Where a girl doesn't listen to her parents and she gets involved with bad group and she starts doing drugs and it just goes downhill from there. It's turned out to be a hoax, but it was an enormously important and influential book at the time. Jefferson Airplane even did the song, right? Go Ask Alice based on it, or White Rabbit.
Oh, of
And so
course, yes.
Waters,
I always
White
assumed that
Rabbit.
was Alice in Wonderland for some reason.
Yeah, yeah, and there's that aspect of it too. And Waters in Female Trouble very much takes pains that it's Dawn Davenport. She's just born this way, right? To quote Lady Gaga, this is just the way that she is. And her parents are perfectly nice people. They're fine. They just want a regular house. And she is the one destroying Christmas over cha-cha heels. And then it just goes down.
It's just but it's a hyper materialism as well of that's capitalism, isn't it?
Right.
Everybody knows that Christmas where there had to be a Cabbage Patch doll, there had to be the first personal computer, and the Arnold Schwarzenegger film Jingle All the Way is an action movie based on getting your child the one toy that they want at Christmas. So it's again, it's sort of like it's an exaggeration and all the rest of it, but it's an exaggeration of something that exists.
She's not wrong, right? She's
we
not
we all
wrong.
want cha-cha heels.
The joke. And in rewatching it, doing this work, I have to say, I've been really wondering what would have happened if she got the cha-cha heels, right?
Very
That
good
she had
point.
a dream. And it's the Wizard of Oz, which Waters has spoken about as being so influential and loving so much. All she wanted was to go to Oz in a pair of cha-cha heels. She wanted her red sparkly shoes. And they wouldn't give it to her. She had to be stuck in the suburban life. And I understand that. I connect to that. I relate to it. And I think that's why the film still resonates so hard with the audience who could watch them when they came out and the new younger audience. There's just something about it that is so universal and hilarious at the same time. But Dawn was not wrong.
You've got to get your cha-cha heels. You've got to. And I mean, there's so many moments in John Waters' movies which are, the WTF moments. I think of her being raped by herself in the sense that she plays the rapist as well as the. I'm talking about Divine here
Yeah.
um, in Female Trouble, and just how again that moment is sort of like such a meta moment. It's the opposite of the dog crap moment. It's sort of like this is purely fictional and yet at the same
Mhm.
time and purely movie magic, and yet at the same time it's weirdly not hiding it. You're kind of very aware. Oh, wait a minute, that's divine, isn't it?
You'd be surprised how many people don't realize that that is divine.
Right.
And they're horrified by the fact that she had to endure that. But there's edits, right? There's and they're so blatant too. With the over the shoulder and the over the shoulder, it's this parody of that Hitchcock, shot reverse shot that's so over the top, and once you see it, you can't unsee that either. And yes, that's so it's so meta, right? That's what we say now. It's so what does it mean to rape yourself, to pillage yourself? And in those books and pamphlets and the newspaper articles I was referring to that Waters is drawing from for this film about, the trouble with the young women, this is what these girls deserve. And they did it to themselves, right? They did it. If they had just listened to their parents, where it's so far beyond just victim blaming, what we call it now.
Mm.
It is if they had listened, this wouldn't have happened, and this is what is deserved. And so you have this moment, I think, of the ultimate in victim blaming, where she's brought it on herself and is raping herself.
It's sort of almost like a station. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's like he rewrites these. moral panics as sort of kind of grotesque fantasies.
Hmm.
And it's like a Station of the Cross for a fallen woman. You know, she has to leave home. She has to hitchhike. She has to be raped. She has to take drugs. There has to be an abortion or a unwanted pregnancy. All of these things. And
Hmm.
all of the things you shouldn't find funny, all of the things you should never joke about. I mean, we've just been talking using words like rape and rapist and sort of chortling along, and that of course, you know, in polite society in the realms of academia, even God forfend on a podcast, that's sort of something you should never do, right? It should
No.
never happen. But Waters allows that.
He does. And Todd Solondz, who I wrote on in conjunction with Waters initially, Solondz does the same thing in Welcome to the Dollhouse. And
Absolutely.
in Welcome to the Dollhouse, you have that line that audiences didn't know what to do with, even though this was a well-received, that is only very well-received film, where at 3 o'clock today, Wiener, I'm going to rape you. And the theater would go silent because no one knew what to do with it. But the joke, in a very Waters-esque way, is that then at 3 o'clock, she shows up,
Mm.
which immediately made me think, ah, this is how Waters would do it. You know, this is she's showing up to her own destruction because she's interested, she's curious. And that's why Dawn Davenport left too. She wanted to get completely out of suburbia and see where life was going to take her.
For liberation, freedom comes with a price,
Mhm.
and you've got to follow your narrative ultimately. And I think I mean, I've just watched Ballerina. Stay with me. Ball Ballerina from the John Wick universe. And I find that kind of film so more, the fact that that kind of film is like light entertainment now, in which you get hundreds of people brutally murdered for
Mhm.
entertainment without any consequence or context, without any connection to the real world, video game like. And that's considered, you know, okay, you know, nobody would ever say that's a tasteless film, you know. Uh,
Mhm.
I find, by comparison, John Waters's tastelessness moral. You know, I find it
Mhm.
morally upstanding. I think there's a morality to it, which is almost like a disappointed romantic. You know, it's like the world isn't good enough for John Waters.
I think we can see this most readily in Serial Mom. I agree with
Mm.
you entirely. Where the etiquette, not recycling, gets you killed, right? The
Yeah.
etiquette of the suburbs, don't wear white shoes after Labor Day. And that's the big, showdown with Patty Hearst playing the juror, juror number, I don't remember which one it was, but the juror. Um, and she is wearing the white shoes after Labor Day, and Beverly Sutpin is just so utterly aghast by it. And there is a moral code to it. It's just different than the one that's put out there by a straight-laced heteronormative society. Who are the good people? Who are not the good people? We see this in Crybaby too. And these are and Hairspray, right? And the people who are considered just the height of society are racist and insular and frankly not very nice to the freaks and not very nice to the alternative people, as we used to call them, the underground. And Waters is nice to them. He not only do they come out on top in his films, but the way that he films them, the way that he frames them is never in an exploitive way. Though he might be drawing from exploitation film, he is not exploiting his characters in the same way that his original source material did. And that's the difference with Waters. He's very nice. He's nice when you meet him, and his characters, while doing things that normal, the norms might not see as very nice. Waters is saying it's okay. It's it's fine. People can be this way, and he's not going to use their foibles, their fetishes, their alternative underground interests in a way against them in order to make money.
I think that that is reflected as well by the sort of the way that he creates this troupe of actors, and all of them he sort of treats like they're all superstars, so that when they turn up in his films, they have entrances and there's a real sense of, oh, wonderful, there's that face again, there's that personality again. And he's
Mhm.
obviously written the character specifically with a certain performer in mind, or even maybe uses their name. So, and it strikes me as a much more, obviously it's sort of like, to use the carnival metaphor again, it's a sort of hall of mirrors version of Andy Warhol's factory, where
Mhm.
instead of being the beautiful people, Edie Sedgwick and Paul Morrissey, it's these people who wouldn't get past the bouncer in Studio 54.
Yes, it's the superstars, right? It's
Mm,
the way in which you create a superstar, which Divine was so interested in connecting herself to the Bombshells, but to Elizabeth Taylor, most of all, to
mhm.
Marilyn Monroe. I see so much Monroe, especially in that walk as Divine. We see Divine walking down the street. And Warhol is the one first underground, but then experimental filmmaker that Waters has always allowed himself to be connected with and would actually mention and connect himself with too. Waters adores Warhol's films
Mm.
and has outright said that he doesn't think that they've gotten the due that they should, and that one day they will. And maybe the next book should be on Warhol's films, right? Because they sit there languishing, and I feel like people don't watch them. You might go see a Warhol exhibit at a museum where they're projecting a film, but that's usually the only place that people encounter them. They're not streaming. No one streams Sleeper and just watches someone sleep, right? Or a filming of a building, but Waters absolutely loved what Warhol was doing, particularly with the superstars. You can see that being replicated in the Dreamlanders, as you pointed out.
Mm.
But you can also see it in the way in which she's able to fuse commercial entertainment value, Crybaby and Hairspray, and then earlier the Send Up with Polyester, with well, something that isn't so commercial, with ideas that are not very commercial, and in doing so, create what we were talking about earlier, this meta look at what is the bombshell, what is the superstar, what is it when we're representing people this way, and who gets to be it and why, and who doesn't get to be it and why. And in Waters, especially in the early films, you have superstars, you have hits being made by people who are not traditionally great looking or traditionally the Hollywood superstar. And here I'm thinking of Edith Massey.
Yeah, well, of course. So you have to, because she's amazing, and I
Hmm.
love Mink Stole as well. I love I mean, I love them all. There are moments, there are line deliveries and line readings that a conventional actor would never get and would never give,
Hmm.
and that's one of the delightful parts of his movies. And so, and it's something you kind of lose a little later on when he's working with more conventional actors. Cecil B. Demented isn't quite as demented as you want it to be,
Hmm.
as entertaining as it
Hmm.
is. But this brings us to sort of to today, really. And you just said that Warhol's films are kind of languishing, and today we're talking the day after the wonderful German actor Udo Kier passed away.
Hmm.
And And it does make you, it made me think, Udo Kier was in 200 films and many of them were sort of European or underground, European art house or underground movies that he would just show up in or be starring in. And it does make me think that art house has become very slick and we have a lot of indie films and we have the festival circuit has very much created
Mhm.
a way of watching these films. It doesn't feel like John Waters today would be, I mean, he would be at Sundance and he would be part of a workshop. No, that's not true. He would find someone like John Waters would find his own way, but I just, you know what I mean? I just find there's a lack of that anarchic inspired DIY version of filmmaking that Waters so exemplifies.
I think Waters anticipated this too, as he does. So many of his films are far ahead of their time. And I'm still always surprised sometimes when I'm looking at a film or thinking about one of his films, and then I see the date of when it came out, because in my mind, it should definitely be 10 years later.
Yeah, same here.
And in Polyester, which is 1981, he's already anticipating what you're describing, which is this kind of folding of the film world onto itself, where trash cinema has become exalted as art cinema. This is the moment he's making it in. And then it becomes underground art cinema in a very Gen X-y 1990s kind of way. And then we revert to experimental and art house. And now we just have the Criterion Collection, which is anointing films as cult or not, right? And giving them that brand of not just legibility, but rather a brand of respectability. And in Polyester, we have that wonderful drive-in moment where Francine is now taken up with Todd Tomorrow, right, played by Tab Hunter,
Amazing.
and who himself is from the drive-ins, right, from the marquee. And so there's that moment, right, where he's casting the famous actor. He was able to get Tab Hunter. So he's already anticipating what's going to come, even in his own films 10 years later. And it's hard to, that word anticipatory is so difficult because essentially I'm saying that he was psychic, that Waters was psychic. And of course, that's an impossibility, but it really seems that way. So Tab Hunter as Todd Tomorrow now owns the drive-in theater, which has become an art house drive-in theater. And I absolutely adore this. And Francine Fishpaw is dressed to the nines in her style, and everyone else there is dressed as if they are at French Fashion Week, and French Fashion Week out of a new wave film from the early 1960s, or even, like a Fellini film, an Italian Fellini film. And she goes into the main office where there is a bar set up and everyone's drinking cocktails. And on the very 1960s mod coffee table, there are issues of Cahiers de Cinema. And I absolutely adore that, because that is the moment, right? That Cahiers de Cinema, the height of film criticism, the art house moment, the art house cinema is meeting the drive-in theater. And it's such a good metaphor of what Waters is doing. But again, it's anticipatory for what you're describing, for where we are, where we were in the 90s, and then really where we are now, where you have critics doing very serious analyses of what were just essentially exploitation films. And Waters was the first to do that. He's been championing Faster Pussycat Kill Kill since day one. He loved this stuff at the drive-in, but he wasn't doing the scholarly analyses of it. And it's becomes very difficult now when you just have this kind of regurgitation of the cult film over and over again without creating anything new. And Waters always made new.
Mm.
Waters always showed us new things. He's an original. He is authentic, even as he's questioning authenticity, much like Andy Warhol did. But now I'm seeing so much of that, just the endless recycling without commentary, without critique, like Waters did of these same old cult narratives. And so, where is the young filmmaker, right, who's doing something different, who's commenting on this, who's um, and I can't imagine what it would be, but as they say, right, you know it when you see it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's just so in line with what I think. I always feel that the worst thing that, for me, one of the enduring symbols of the cul-de-sac that we seem to find ourselves in is the Criterion Closet, where
Mhm.
everybody seems to dream of going into a place to buy fucking DVDs. I mean,
Yeah.
is that it? Is that where we are now? That we're watching Willem Dafoe say, "Oh yes, and another one by Lars von Trier. I'll pick this up." You can have any of these for free. You don't. This is just a commercial branding exercise, guys. Don't act like this is some weird underground sort of taste thing. It's not. It's just a brand, and you're I don't know. It drives me wild because it
Mhm.
seems to neuter cinema. It seems to make cinema just into, wallpaper, just fancy wallpaper to put on your house.
Precisely. And the idea of the physical DVD is posited against streaming as a kind of antidote, as if that DVD is not or was not already, um, a movement forward from the theater, from
Yeah,
the art that it's again, and as you said, it's the commercial project. And I think Waters also, again, to use that word, anticipates this with Pecker, right? And you had mentioned Cecil B. Demented, which is for me, um, they literally brand themselves with their favorite auteur. So, and he's a brand, Waters is a brand by that point too. So you have the send up, this parodying already in the early 1990s and then 2000 of of this branding of the commercialization of what that means, and is it even possible to do outsider art anymore, right? Because even the outsider artists are immediately brought into the mainstream, the proverbial Criterion Closet, and anointed.
John Waters, I'm sure, has done has got into the Criterion closet at some point. I'll have to look it up, but
Oh yeah.
it wouldn't surprise me. He certainly want to. I mean, going back to the beginning of our conversation, and where we started from, when we started talking about literature, and I have this one of the things when I was studying and I was writing my thesis, I was very interested in romantic irony, and I always think this is a really useful concept for a lot of filmmakers because it's a sort of irony that doesn't necessarily devalue what it ironizes. It kind of
Mhm.
celebrates it. It's kind of the, you know, joking, not joking sort of irony that allows you to both interrogate something and at the same time still have that thing. Not not necessarily. And I see that in Waters, although in a way, his celebrations are too exuberant for irony. There is a genuine sincerity there. But when he says, I want to sell out, I can't wait to sell out, that's not just being ironic. He's quite genuinely sincere about that as well. But I do
Mhm.
feel that there is, if he's a romantic ironist, it would be with a capital R and a little I, I think.
I can absolutely say that or see that. And bringing up romanticism, and I think of it with the capital R romanticism,
Mm.
right? That it's it it really is was started as a antidote to what would be the eventually that scientific, technological, modern world. And so the idea is that ironization gets scooped up in the 20th century by the filmmakers and also by the writers who are writing about what I like to think of as the thinginess of the thing, right? I'm thinking of Gertrude Stein here, an
Mm,
umbrella. And Joyce does that, right? The thinginess of Dublin, right?
mm,
The thinginess of the thing. And I feel that in Waters too, right? And it's what you're describing, where you have this, as you said, it's the ironization of the thing. We can dissect the thing almost as a cubist would, right? And or a extreme postmodernist, which was only barely a word when Waters was starting to make films. Um, and and yet we don't lose sight of the fact that object is still there. And though I am pulling it apart and looking at it from all these different sides and all these different facets, it's still there. It's still a thing. I'm not, and often when we think about pulling things apart and analyzing them, right, we're thinking psychoanalysis.
mm,
And we also are thinking commercialization. That's that exploitation. It it devalues the thing in so many ways. You want to keep it whole instead of looking at the parts. But when you start to look at the parts of a John Waters film, it elevates the whole, and he's doing the same thing with his with the Dreamlanders, with the actors, with the subjects, with the materials that he's putting together. It's not a pulling apart to make it more to commodify it, to make it more of a easier exploited for commercial gain, but rather to make it more interesting and to make it more beautiful, like a faceted diamond.
yeah, I totally agree. I mean, ultimately, we might think, that wanting cha-cha heels is lunacy, but at the same time, utterly agreeing that cha-cha heels would be the best thing in the world.
Mhm.
We want our cake. We want to throw it in someone's face, and we want to eat it. So it's three times over that cake is going to be used in that metaphor. Um, so, Michelle, what are you looking at next? What is your next project? Have you got something else lined?
I don't have anything lined up. I'm in that wonderful period between projects where I'm looking at the past. What is it that I had started and put aside and maybe want to start working with again? And I'm also taking a lot of long walks and seeing what is in my head that hasn't come quite to fruition yet. One of the projects that I'm looking at returning to was an extended look at the vampire and modernism, and in particular, high modernism in literature and film. And I have spent a career finding vampires and vampiric lore, whereas I like to think they're not supposed to be in high modernism. And so I think that the vampire is a founding motif and trope of modernist film and literature. And that's something that I'm sort of getting back to, but taking forward again in a new light. And in 2025, we have so many vampire films coming out, which is just utterly fascinating to me.
Yeah, yeah, well, absolutely. Sinners was a huge blockbuster
Hmm.
recently, and oh, every year there seems to be at least two or three quite mainstream horror movies which absolutely knock it out of the park in terms of
Hmm.
thinking about stuff. Weapons as well was one which really stayed with me
Yes.
long after I saw it. Um, so
Hmm.
that's great. Hey, final question. Is Donald Trump a John Waters character?
That's an interesting question. Um, he's not self-effacing enough, so I think no.
Mm. Yeah, I don't
No.
think he's not surrounded by the gang
Right.
that John Waters, Divine in Pink Flamingos, it has a trailer with a family, you know. there is human connection, and he doesn't have that human connection with people around him. He just has, suppliants.
Right. And the only role I think that Trump could maybe slip into would be as the amusement park owner in Hairspray, right, played by Divine. There even might be a little resemblance there at that stage. But even then, Divine, the amusement park owner has relationships to other people and wants what's best for the amusement park, and is not just completely out for themselves, right?
Knocking down the
so
East
even
Wing.
then, that role doesn't fit exactly perfectly.
Yeah, we can't blame John Waters for Trump at all. He's
No.
yeah, that's the truly tasteless. So our enemies are the Criterion Closet, Ballerina, and from the John Wick universe, and Donald Trump. No, I mean, that's I shouldn't tie you to my own antipathies without.
Now, Melania Trump is an interesting question, whether she's in the universe.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do think the whole fact that they're trashing the White House and putting, gold everywhere and, putting cement over the Rose Garden, there is something weirdly punk about it. I mean, I don't like it, but there is an element that, it could have been written by some sort of science fiction punk writer.
I could see that, but I guess I feel like there would be more skateboarding allowed in the Rose Garden.
Exactly. The Ramones would be playing on the roof of the White House at that point.
Exactly. Exactly. There'd be the fun aspect to it, right? It doesn't feel fun. It doesn't feel like anything goes, because that's way more fun than the way things have been.
Absolutely. It doesn't have the carnivalesque. That's what we really need, the carnivalesque.
Exactly.
Well, listen, Michelle, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I love talking to you about John Waters, and I'd love to have you back anytime you like to talk more.
Oh, thank you very much. I would love to be back, and it's been a lot of fun. So I appreciate the offer.
Happy holidays! Want to give your host a gift? Consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show this holiday season. It really helps the show grow. From all of us at Believe, have a Merry Christmas, everyone, and a happy holiday.